You know, when we talk about weight loss, it usually feels pretty, I don't know, scientific numbers, right? Calories in, calories out.
Metabolism, maybe the latest drug.
Yeah, very biological.
Totally. And look, that biology part is key. You absolutely need it to, well, lose the weight initially.
For sure. It's a physical mechanism, no doubt.
But what really grabbed me about these sources, the ones inspired by Dan Hollis's work, is how they shift gears completely.
Mm-hmm.
Like once that biology starts doing its thing,
Mm-hmm.
they zoom right into what happens after
Mm.
the psychological side, your internal world,
Yeah.
and this thing they keep mentioning, narrative.
Right. These sources really light up the fact that the journey isn't over when the scale moves down. Not at all.
Okay.
It's really about what happens when maybe that intense physical struggle gets a bit quieter. You know, the story that was maybe kind of buried under everything else.
Yeah.
The weird silence when the cravings aren't screaming anymore, and what you actually have to like actively build so the change actually sticks around. So that's what we're doing in this deep dive then. Trying to get past just the biology and into this other side of it. The part people don't talk about much.
Exactly. Understanding those deeper dynamics, once the physical stuff is moving.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay. So the big idea, the one that just kind of jumps off the page from this stuff, is this quote: weight loss is biology. Staying there is narrative.
Ooh, I like that. It just completely flips the script, doesn't it?
It really does.
The biology gets you there, but actually living there long term.
I thought,
The accent more biology, it's the story. The
Mm.
story you build about yourself, about food, about everything.
And, these sources, they're super honest about how tough that territory is.
Yeah.
The after part. It's not simple, not linear.
No kidding. They talk about something called identity grief. That really hit me.
Yeah.
This feeling people have, like suddenly realizing, I have no idea who I was without it, without the struggle, without the focus on food or weight.
Right. You're physically lighter, maybe, but this huge piece of your identity, even if it was a difficult one, was all tangled up in that relationship with food or your body size.
And you just don't see that angle in the typical weight loss ads, do you?
Not usually, no. It points to this really deep internal shift that, just losing the weight doesn't automatically fix.
And what about the hunger itself? The sources say it doesn't just vanish. The physical hunger, the loud part, it shapeshifts.
Yeah, shapeshifts. It becomes, well, maybe memory, sometimes confusion. It definitely leaves a space, a void. They talk a lot about the silence.
A silence.
Yeah, this really profound quiet left behind when those cravings, the ones that maybe felt totally overwhelming before, just aren't there in the same way.
But almost sounds confusing in itself, like disorienting. It's interesting they frame relapse not just as, oh, I'm hungry again, but as a relapse into confusion.
Exactly. So that old signal, the craving, is gone or quiet, and you haven't built anything to understand or fill that new space.
Yeah.
People can feel really lost.
Ah.
And that confusion, that feeling lost, it can easily send you right back to the old familiar patterns, even if the intense physical drive isn't the main thing pushing you at first.
Okay, so this seems like where the semaglutide discussion comes in these sources.
Right. It's talked about as a tool, specifically a tool that can give you that pause.
The pause from the noise.
Yeah, exactly. It dials down the noise of appetite, quiets that biological drive a bit.
But there's a big but here, isn't there?
Oh, absolutely. A critical caution that silence the drug helps create. It can actually be kind of dangerous.
Dangerous. How?
Because it lets all the buried stuff come up. The old stories, the issues you maybe used food to cope with. The medication isn't the fix itself. It's more like a window to change.
A window. I like that metaphor. It lets you see clearer, maybe.
Yeah. It makes it easier to see what needs fixing, what needs rebuilding, because those loud biological signals are turned down.
But it doesn't do the rebuilding.
Absolutely not. It just gives you the space to rebuild.
Okay. So, if the biology, or maybe a medication, gives you this window, this quiet space, what do the sources say you're supposed to do in that space? How do you build something real?
This is where they lay out this really human-centered approach, kind of framework.
Right, like a plan for the after phase. And it starts with leaning into the silence.
Exactly. The first step is start with silence. Recognize that quiet isn't just empty. It's a chance
A chance to.
to actually notice stuff, the emotions, the thoughts, maybe the discomfort that bubbles up when you can't just grab food to, soothe yourself or distract yourself like before.
They have a pretty intense quote for this one. When the cravings stop, the truth begins.
Yeah, stark, right? It
Yeah.
means really listening in that quiet space, not just trying to fill it up again immediately.
Okay, so you listen. Then what? If the silence shows you the patterns.
Then you got to deal with the actions, the habits tied to those patterns. Which brings us to number 2, rewire the rituals.
Rituals. You mean like reaching for chips when stressed?
Yeah.
Or eating in front of the TV, those kinds of habits.
Precisely. And these aren't just little twerks. They're like neurologically wired in. Rituals built around food.
Ah.
So the source is stress. You don't just remove the old habit. That leaves a hole. You have to actively replace it.
Replace it with something else.
Yeah, consciously stitch in new rituals. Maybe it's a walk when you feel stressed, maybe journaling, maybe calling a friend. Different responses for those old triggers where food was the automatic answer.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the sources point out that silence from medication. It can make it super clear which habits need replacing because that old cue reward thing with food is kind of broken.
Right.
There's another powerful line here. Every pound lost is a habit that needs replacing, not just removing.
Wow. Okay, very practical. So listen to the silence, build new rituals. What about yourself? How you see yourself in all this?
That's crucial. Element number 3. Anchor identity before the weight drops. This is where things can get really tricky.
Yeah.
Well, think about it. Your body can change physically, sometimes pretty fast, right? Faster than your head catches up, faster than your internal self-image, your identity.
Yeah, I could see that.
The sources call this a trap. Because if you haven't started working on, okay, who am I becoming now, before you look totally different, your brain, your old programming, can actually sabotage things.
Sabotage, like pull you back.
Kind of. To get your outside back in line with your inside picture, your brain's like, wait, this new body doesn't feel like me.
Whoa, okay. The quote sums it up. Your body changes faster than your identity. That's the trap.
Exactly. It's a mismatch that needs attention.
And trying to rush that internal catch-up, that leads to the next point.
Yep. Number 4, pace the process. And this isn't just about, not losing weight too quickly for your metabolism. It's emotional pacing, psychological pacing.
Because fast results don't mean lasting results. I saw that in the sources.
Precisely. You might get quick physical changes, great.
Yeah.
But if your identity, your habits, your ways of coping emotionally haven't had time to adjust and integrate, the whole thing's shaky. It can collapse.
So slowing down is actually protective.
They describe pacing as protection.
Yeah.
Protecting the whole transformation, not just chasing a number.
Yeah.
Letting the inside keep up with the outside.
Okay, this is making sense. So you're in the silence, changing habits, working on identity, pacing it. What if you are using a tool like medication? What about stopping?
Good question. That's element 5. Plan the off-ramp from day 1.
From day 1, not when you're thinking about stopping?
Nope. From the very beginning. They really emphasize this. Planning for life after the medication, if you're using it, has to be part of the strategy right away.
Why so early?
Because, and this is another key quote, the real work begins after the medication. Remember the relapse into confusion.
Yeah.
Often, that's those unaddressed patterns, the old narratives, popping back up once the drug's quieting effect, that pause is gone. You need a plan, a structure, for when that window isn't quite so quiet anymore.
That's huge. Okay, so this is a lot of internal work, listening, rewiring, identity stuff, pacing, planning. Seems tough to do alone.
Totally. Which leads directly to number 6, build the scaffolding. You
Right.
absolutely cannot do this deep work in a vacuum.
Scaffolding,
Yeah.
like construction scaffolding, support beams.
Exactly. Structure, support, and the sources are clear. This isn't
Yeah.
just nice to have. They call support essential neurobiological scaffolding.
Neurobiological, that sounds serious.
It is. It means the emotional support, maybe a community, having structures in your life, even just having the language to talk about what you're going through.
Okay.
They make this interesting distinction, too, between AI and humans. Like, AI could give you information, data, but humans provide meaning.
And you need both.
You need both. Information and that human connection, that support structure. The quote is blunt. Support isn't optional. It's neurobiological scaffolding.
Wow. Okay, so all these pieces, the silence, the rituals, identity, pace, planning, the scaffolding, it feels like they're all building towards the final and maybe biggest piece, the one we started with.
You got it. Number 7, rewrite the narrative. This is the heart of it.
The story.
The story. Helping people fundamentally change the stories they tell themselves. Stories maybe they've believed for years. About failing, about food being the enemy, and often the really deep one, about whether they even deserve to feel good or be healthy.
Because no drug, no diet can fix a core belief that says, I don't deserve this.
That's the argument. The sources state it plainly. Medication or biology alone cannot sustain a story that says, I don't deserve this. The new story, the new narrative, has to match the new reality you're trying to build.
So if you pull all that together,
Wow.
the shift they're describing is massive. It's moving from just thinking about biology
To focusing on identity. Moving from seeing medication maybe as a magic bullet.
to seeing it as a window, a tool for finding deeper meaning, moving away from shame.
Towards building real practical structure and support. And moving from being lost in that silence.
Into having an actual strategy. Wow.
And that, according to these sources, is how real transformation holds. It's not just the weight coming off. It's the life, the self that gets built in that space.
So why does this matter so much for, for you listening if you're on this kind of journey or thinking about it or supporting someone who is?
Because understanding this, it changes where you put your focus. It suggests the really deep work. It doesn't just start when you decide, okay, I'm losing weight.
When does it start then?
According to this perspective, it really kicks in when you stop needing food to explain or manage your feelings. That's the turning point.
So the whole journey, looked at this way, it's not really about just eating less.
No. It's framed ultimately as not about eating less, it's about living more.
Living more.
No.
I like that.
But there's that warning, too. These sources argue pretty strongly that biology can get you results, sure. But if you don't deal with the underlying psychology, the narrative...
Well, biology will give you results that psychology will dismantle.
Exactly. Once the initial push is over, if the foundation isn't rebuilt, things can unravel.
Okay. So, based on all this today, this idea that staying changed is really about the story you tell and the structures you build. Maybe here's something for you to think about.
Yeah.
What story are you actively writing for yourself right now in your life? Is it a story, a narrative that can actually support and sustain the changes you really want? Not just on the scale, but like in how you live, who you're becoming.